March 23, 1945, Spire, Germany. The thunder of artillery shakes the Rhine Valley as smoke swirls above shattered villages. Amid the chaos, one man rises from the mud, rifle in hand, uniform torn, bleeding but unbroken. His name is Edward Allen Carter Jr., a black soldier leading a small American platoon deep behind enemy lines. When others fall, he presses forward, alone, crawling toward the sound of German machine guns. Every step he takes defies not only death, but a system that never wanted him to be a hero. That night, Carter would capture 2 enemies, kill 6 and earn a nation's respect, yet his glory would be buried under the silence of prejudice. The world was burning. By 1945, World War II had swallowed entire continents. Europe lay in ruins. Nazi Germany, desperate and cornered, fought to its last breath. The Allied forces, America, Britain and the Soviet Union, were closing in from all sides. But beneath the thunder of tanks and victory speeches, another silent battle raged within the US Army itself, a battle of color. Over 1 million African Americans served during World War II. They loaded bombs, drove trucks, cooked meals, and fought in segregated units, often led by white officers who doubted their courage before they ever saw combat. America was preaching freedom abroad, while denying it at home. In the barracks, white and colored signs divided soldiers of the same uniform. In restaurants near bases, black soldiers were refused service. And even when German prisoners of war were allowed to eat inside, this was the America Edward Allen. Carter Jr. served a land where democracy wore a mask. In the early 1940s, the United States fought 2 wars, one against fascism overseas and one against racism within its own ranks. President Franklin D. Roosevelt's administration had opened the military to black enlistment under pressure, but segregation remained the law of the land. The U.S. Army was structured by race. White troops served in frontline combat divisions. Most black soldiers were restricted to support roles, digging trenches, building roads, or unloading ships. Commanders argued they were unfit for leadership, but overseas, something changed. When black troops arrived in Europe, they found that many British and French civilians treated them with dignity, even admiration. To these locals, they were not colored soldiers, just Americans. This human decency stood in painful contrast to what they experienced at home. Many African-American troops began to question why they were risking their lives for a freedom they themselves did not possess. And yet, they fought. They fought not only for victory, but for validation, to prove that courage knows no color. Edward Allen Carter Jr. was born in Los Angeles in 1916, but his childhood was anything but ordinary. His parents were missionaries, and he grew up in Shanghai, China, where he witnessed war at an early age. When the Japanese invaded China in the 1930s, Carter, barely in his teens, ran away from home and joined the Chinese Nationalist Army, where he learned the brutal realities of combat. He returned to America years later, trained, fearless, and ready to serve his country. But America wasn't ready for him. The color of his skin became his first battlefield. In 1941, when the U.S. entered World War II, Carter enlisted in the Army. His talent was undeniable. He spoke multiple languages, had battlefield experience, and showed leadership qualities that most officers only dreamed of. Yet the Army assigned him to menial labor far from the front lines. Still, Carter refused to be invisible. His persistence and skill eventually earned him a place in the 12th Armored Division, one of the few units that began integrating black combat soldiers toward the end of the war. By early 1945, the Allied advance into Germany was brutal and relentless. Hitler's forces were retreating, but each mile gained came at a terrible cost. The 12th Armored Division, known as the Hellcats, was pushing through southern Germany, crossing the Rhine River in pursuit of Nazi forces. Carter, now a staff sergeant, was assigned to lead a small squad tasked with clearing enemy positions near the German city of Spire. The mission was simple on paper, but nothing in war ever is. The Rhine was one of the last natural barriers protecting the heart of Nazi Germany. German troops fought with desperation. Villages were reduced to rubble. Machine guns hid in basements. Snipers waited in church towers. It was here, on March 23, 1945, that Edward Allen Carter Jr. faced the moment that would define and nearly erase his legacy. As his platoon approached Spire, German fire erupted from the far side of a field. Bullets tore through the air. Several of Carter's men fell immediately. The platoon was pinned down, unable to move forward or retreat. Carter didn't hesitate. He volunteered to lead a small team across the open field to silence the enemy machine guns. It was a near-suicidal mission. But for Carter, hesitation was a luxury others couldn't afford. This was his chance to prove, once and for all, that valor has no color line. And in the next few hours, Edward Allen Carter Jr. would not just prove it, he would immortalize it. The cold wind howled across the flat fields of the Rhine. Smoke from distant artillery mixed with the smell of mud and gunpowder. In the early afternoon, Edward Allen Carter Jr. and his men received their orders. Advance across an open field toward suspected German positions. The ground stretched bare and exposed. No trees, no cover, just a few shallow ditches. Beyond that, a cluster of farmhouses, and behind them hidden guns. Carter studied the terrain through his binoculars. He knew it was a trap, but the order was clear: move forward, secure the position. As his platoon advanced, the silence shattered. A burst of machine gun fire tore through the line. Men dropped instantly. The rest dove for cover, trapped in the open. Bullets kicking up dirt around them, pinned down, surrounded, and without radio contact. The platoon was moments away from annihilation. Carter crawled to his commanding officer and volunteered. He asked for permission to lead a small team forward to locate and destroy the enemy nest. His commander hesitated. Sending men into that field was a death sentence. But Carter's voice was steady. "Sir, let me go. I can get them." Finally, permission was granted. Carter gathered 3 volunteers and began crawling across the frozen earth. Every movement was deliberate. The ground was slick with melting snow, the air filled with the thunder of artillery. Halfway across the field, German machine guns opened fire again. Carter's squad was caught in a storm of bullets. 2 men fell instantly. A third was hit in the leg, screaming for help. Carter turned back under fire, dragging the wounded soldier behind a small mound. Then he pressed forward, alone. He was now one man against an entire German position. He crawled on his belly for nearly 150 yards, moving inch by inch through mud and blood. Every few seconds, a bullet snapped past his ear. He could hear the Germans shouting orders. They knew someone was coming. A mortar exploded nearby, throwing dirt over him. Shrapnel tore into his arm and leg. He grimaced, but didn't stop. When he reached the first farmhouse, he spotted 8 German soldiers dug in behind sandbags. Their machine gun covered the entire field. Carter waited. He counted their reloads. He watched their rhythm. Then he sprang up, firing his rifle with deadly precision. 2 Germans fell instantly. The rest returned fire, riddling the walls around him. Carter ducked behind a broken wagon, tossed a grenade, and charged again. Another explosion. Smoke, screams, silence. When the dust cleared, 6 Germans lay dead. 2 survivors tried to flee, but Carter was faster. He cornered them, rifle raised. "Drop your weapons," he ordered in German. They obeyed. Despite his wounds, 4 bullets and multiple shrapnel injuries, Carter forced the 2 prisoners back across the field at gunpoint. Each step was agony, but he refused to fall. When they reached the American line, he handed them over, then collapsed. The entire platoon watched in disbelief. One man had done what an entire unit could not, in interrogation. The captured Germans revealed crucial intelligence. Their position had been part of a larger ambush, and dozens more enemy troops were lying in wait beyond the ridge. Because of Carter's heroism, the American command avoided a massacre. His actions saved countless lives that day. He should have died a hero, but instead, he lived to face the quiet battle that every black soldier knew too well. Carter's commander immediately recommended him for the Medal of Honor, the highest military award in the United States. But as the paperwork moved upward through the Army's segregated hierarchy, something happened. The recommendation was quietly downgraded. Instead of the Medal of Honor, Carter received the Distinguished Service Cross, a lesser award, though still the second highest for valor. The reason was never written, but everyone understood it. He was a black man in 1945. When the war ended weeks later, America celebrated its victory over racism and tyranny abroad. But for soldiers like Carter, that victory felt hollow. They had fought for freedom that they still did not possess. Carter returned home to a country still divided. The newspapers wrote little about him. His name faded into the background of history. He re-enlisted, hoping to serve again, but the Army's security agencies labeled him a security risk because of his time in China. He was forced to leave the military in 1949. It broke him quietly. A man who had risked everything for his nation was cast aside, his heroism buried under suspicion and prejudice. Still, Carter never spoke in bitterness. To his family, he remained calm, proud of his men, proud of his uniform. He believed history would one day remember, and decades later, it finally did. The guns fell silent in Europe on May 8, 1945. Nazi Germany had surrendered. Across the world, celebrations erupted, streets filled with cheers, flags, and victory songs. But for Staff Sergeant Edward Allen Carter Jr., the sound of victory was quieter and lonelier. As the war ended, soldiers returned home with parades and honors. Medals gleamed on crisp uniforms. Generals made speeches about unity and sacrifice. Yet among those honored, few faces were black. Carter's platoon knew what he had done. They had seen him crawl across that deadly field, seen him bleed for them. To them, he was a legend. But in the corridors of the U.S. Army bureaucracy, his name was treated differently. His commanding officer's recommendation for the Medal of Honor vanished somewhere between desks and signatures. In its place, a smaller commendation arrived, the Distinguished Service Cross. No ceremony, no headline, just a paper and a handshake. To many, that would have been enough. But Carter had risked his life in ways few soldiers ever would. He had turned certain death into victory and saved lives in the process. He deserved to stand among America's greatest heroes. But America wasn't ready to see him there. In the years that followed, the U.S. military struggled to reconcile its moral contradictions. On paper, it had defeated fascism. In reality, segregation still ruled its own ranks. Even after President Truman signed Executive Order 9981 in 1948, officially desegregating the armed forces, racism lingered in quiet corners, in promotions, assignments, and recognition. When Carter tried to rejoin the military after the war, he was labeled a security risk. Why? Because years earlier, as a young man, he had served briefly in China, fighting against the Japanese alongside Chinese troops. The army, deep in Cold War paranoia, considered that suspicious. A black war hero branded a potential traitor. It was an irony too cruel to describe. Carter was honorably discharged, but barred from re-enlistment. He worked civilian jobs, raised a family, and carried his silence with dignity. His wounds, both physical and invisible, remained. In 1963, at just 46 years old, Edward Allen Carter Jr. died of lung cancer in Los Angeles. His name had nearly disappeared from military memory. No biography, no documentaries, no Hollywood tributes. The same nation that celebrated white heroes like Audie Murphy had forgotten a man whose bravery matched, even surpassed many of them. But history, as it often does, began to whisper. For decades after the war, the stories of black soldiers were scattered, buried under official neglect and cultural amnesia. Schools didn't teach them. Museums didn't display them. Even veterans' reunions often overlooked them. America's collective memory of World War II was painted in black and white. Literally, Carter's Distinguished Service Cross lay quietly in family drawers, his children knowing their father was a hero, but not the full extent of it. It wasn't until the late 1980s that historians began asking difficult questions. How many black soldiers had been denied the Medal of Honor because of racism? The evidence was staggering. Across multiple wars, African American soldiers had been routinely overlooked, even when their actions clearly met the standard for the nation's highest award. In 1993, the U.S. Army finally launched an official investigation, a comprehensive review of racial bias in military decorations during World War II. A team of historians and analysts combed through thousands of records, combat reports and witness statements. Among those files, they found a name that stood out like a scar in history: Edward Allen Carter Jr. His file was clear, his heroism undeniable. Every detail of that day in March 1945 matched the highest criteria for the Medal of Honor, yet no explanation existed for why it had been denied. The silence spoke louder than any words could. When nations forget their heroes, they lose more than memory. They lose integrity. Carter's life story mirrored that of countless black servicemen who fought for a freedom they could not fully enjoy. Men who liberated towns they could not live in. Men who saluted flags that did not salute them back. For more than 50 years, Carter's name drifted between archives and family stories, unspoken in classrooms, absent from memorial walls. But in the quiet persistence of his family, and in the conscience of a few determined historians, his legacy began to stir again. By the late 1990s, those efforts would finally bear fruit, and justice, though delayed, would find its way to him. The year was 1993, nearly half a century after the guns of Europe had gone silent. America was changing. The civil rights movement had reshaped the nation's conscience. The Vietnam generation had forced the country to confront its moral contradictions. And now, the U.S. Army began looking back into its own history, uncomfortably. A team of military historians, commissioned by the U.S. Army Center of Military History, began investigating whether racial prejudice had affected the awarding of the Medal of Honor during World War II. The study was exhaustive. Thousands of service records were reviewed, testimonies cross-checked, and battlefield citations re-examined. The results were undeniable. No black soldier had received the Medal of Honor in World War II, despite hundreds of documented acts of extreme bravery. It wasn't coincidence. It was discrimination written in official ink. Among the names unearthed in this investigation, one file glowed like a beacon through the dust of forgotten archives. Staff Sergeant Edward Allen Carter Jr. His after-action reports were precise. His commanding officer's witness statements were clear. The heroism he displayed on March 23, 1945, met and exceeded every criterion for the Medal of Honor. The investigators recommended that his Distinguished Service Cross be reconsidered. The findings were forwarded to the Pentagon, then to the President of the United States. For the Carter family, it was the first time anyone in authority had ever acknowledged what they already knew. Their father had been wronged. On January 13, 1997, in a ceremony at the White House, President Bill Clinton stood before 7 African-American families, representing 7 forgotten heroes of World War II. Each had risked their life for a country that had once refused to see them as equals. Each had been denied the Medal of Honor because of the color of their skin, and that day, history finally spoke their names aloud. Among them was Staff Sergeant Edward Allen Carter Jr. His son, Edward Allen Carter III, accepted the medal on his father's behalf. As Clinton read the citation, the room fell silent. Staff Sergeant Edward Allen Carter Jr. distinguished himself by extraordinary heroism, advancing across open fields under heavy fire, killing 6 enemy soldiers and capturing 2 others despite being wounded multiple times. His bravery, leadership, and indomitable spirit reflect the highest traditions of military service. The applause that followed was more than ceremonial. It was redemptive. For the first time in 52 years, America officially recognized the hero it had ignored. Carter's remains were later moved to Arlington National Cemetery, the final resting place of the nation's most honored soldiers. On his tombstone, beneath the Medal of Honor emblem, are just a few words. Edward A. Carter, Jr., United States Army. World War II. Simple, proud, eternal. But his story didn't end in marble and medals. It began again in classrooms, museums, and films. The U.S. Army's own museums began featuring Carter's portrait. His story appeared in documentaries and articles, including those from Army.mil, Military.com, and PBS. Students began to learn that America's victory in World War II wasn't just white and male, it was multiracial, complex, and deeply human. Edward Allen Carter Jr.'s story is not just a tale of wartime bravery. It is a mirror held up to history. It forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. How many heroes were forgotten, not because they failed, but because they succeeded while being black? How many medals were denied? How many graves left unmarked because the truth did not fit the image of the America that existed in 1945? Carter's journey reminds us that heroism does not depend on recognition. He did not fight for medals. He fought because it was right. Even when his own nation doubted his worth, he believed in its ideals more than many who denied him. He lived and died as proof that courage is not defined by the color of a uniform, but by the heart that beats beneath it. In the decades since his recognition, the U.S. military has made progress, integrating ranks, celebrating diversity, and confronting its own history. But the echoes of Carter's struggle still linger. Wherever injustice hides behind bureaucracy, his story has inspired generations of soldiers of color, from Vietnam to Iraq, who saw in him a reflection of their own fight for dignity. Today, he stands as a symbol not just of bravery, but of perseverance against systemic erasure. The Edward A. Carter Jr. Army Reserve Center in California, along with schools and veterans' memorials, now bear his name. Yet the truest monument to his legacy is invisible. It lives in the hearts of those who refuse to let history forget. The battlefield of Spire is quiet now. The fields where he crawled are covered in grass. The ruins rebuilt, the guns silent. But if you listen closely, you can still hear the echo of one man's defiance, a soldier crawling through fire. Determined not to die invisible, Edward Allen Carter Jr. fought 2 wars, one against tyranny abroad and one against injustice at home. He won both. He captured 6 enemies in battle, one historian wrote, but the greatest victory he ever won was over the silence of history itself. His courage still marches, through time, through memory, through every soldier who believes that valor needs no permission to exist.